Welcome to Mythical Phylogeny Adventures. I'm your guide, Jason. If you are watching this on the day it comes out, tomorrow is Easter. So let's look at a goddess whose worship is often thought to be the original source for the story. Ishtar, or Inanna, comes from ancient Mesopotamian and Sumeria, and is amongst the oldest recordings of deities. So she has been around up to 6,000 years. The name Inanna comes from the Sumerians, but the more well-known name of Ishtar was used in Babylon, Assyria, and the Akkadian Empire. This is a bit complicated, but originally they were two separate goddesses, but combined after the conquest of Sargon of Akkad. She is also called the Queen of Heaven. Constantly, she sought to spread her domain over the world, gaining more power and followers. Her largest temple was in the city of Uruk. She was the goddess of fertility, sex, but not marriage, and war. She has a twin brother, Utu, or Shemesh, by the Akkadians, with her sun god brother. The two of them oversaw justice. She also refers to the goddess of the underworld, Ereshkigal, as her sister, but they are rarely mentioned together outside of one tale. The identity of her parents is debated. Usually they say the moon god, Nenen, and his wife, Ningal, the goddess of dreams and visions. Other texts claim she is the child of the sky god En, and another gives Enlil. Yeah, her family ties are complicated. At one time, she was married to Dumuzid, or Tammuz, god of shepherds. The death of her husband is a rather important tale of hers. In the Sumerian version, known as the Descent of Inanna, Ishtar decides to descend into the underworld, ruled over by her sister, Ereshkigal. The text sadly is damaged, and the reason for the journey is never mentioned. Some speculate that she was attempting to expand her domain further, though it might have been on an impulse. She didn't go unprepared. She collected 7 powerful pieces of her regalia, which she wore: a turban, on her head a jeweled chain called the heart catcher, a lazurite necklace, another pearl necklace, gold bracelets, and an adorned breastplate, and a cloak. She also left orders for Ninshubur, her assistant. First, she was to perform the rites of lamentation, and after 3 days, if Ishtar has not returned, she was to visit Enlil, and then Nenen, and finally Enki. She was to impress the gods with her mourning for the loss of Ishtar. Thus, she departs. Ishtar reaches the palace of Ganzer, which has the gates to the underworld, known as Kur. Now, there is a bit of backstory we need to cover here. Namely, Ishtar and Ereshkigal aren't on the best of terms. Yeah, if this is sounding like a soap opera, it kind of is. And the second thing to know is Ereshkigal's husband, Lord Gugalana, who had recently perished. Oh, and some speculate that he was also the bowl of heaven which Gilgamesh and Enkidu slew due to Ishtar's antics. I told you, soap opera, didn't I? Ishtar approaches the gatekeeper, Neti, also called Bitu, saying that she wishes to attend the late lord's funeral with her sister. Now, Ereshkigal doesn't trust her sister for good reasons, and sees through the charade, but plays along. A porter is sent to help escort Ishtar through the 7 gates. At each one, Ishtar must perform a rite of passage, which involves removing clothing. By the time she reaches Ereshkigal, Ishtar was naked. In the Akkadian version, they fight, and Ishtar unleashes 60 diseases upon her sister but fails. The 7 judges of the dead are summoned, and Ishtar is forced to remain in the underworld. But her sister was able to impose another condition, that she was to remain dead. Ereshkigal then took Ishtar's corpse and hung it up on a peg, and there she was to remain. Except Ishtar's assistant went to work as instructed. Rejected by the first 2 gods, she then went to see Enki. Now, there is a reason which he does help, according to the Akkadian version. While Ishtar was in the underworld, the world became celibate, which means no children being born. It wouldn't take long before it could bring forth the end of civilization. Enki took the dirt from under his fingernails and crafted 2 figures, Kurgara, the food of life, and Galatura, the drink of life. Ereshkigal welcomes the 2 figures into her home and is a gracious host, offers food and drink, but the 2 reject it, and instead request that corpse hanging on the peg over yonder. Not wishing to offend Enki's messengers, she complies, and the 2 then provide the food and drink of life to restore Ishtar to life. She wishes to leave, but the 7 judges of the underworld stop her. No one may leave the underworld unscathed. If she wishes to return to the mortal world, she must find a substitute. So the Galu, or demons, follow her back to the mortal world. She goes to see her husband, and finds him sitting on his throne, but not in mourning for his wife. In anger, she offers Dumazid to the devils, who take him back to the underworld as her replacement. But the story doesn't end there. Ishtar's twin brother aids him by turning him into a serpent and escapes the underworld. He then goes to her sister, Geshtinana, but the devils return and seek to drag him back to the underworld. Now, Ereshkigal isn't completely evil and hears Geshtiana's plea, and they come to an agreement. Dumazid will return to the underworld for half of the year if Geshtinana will fill in for the second half. In another version, Ereshkigal is moved by seeing Ishtar's tears of remorse that she agrees to let Dumazid leave the underworld for half of the year. This is the story known as the Return of Dumazid. There are 2 possible children of her, Shara, a god of war, and Lulal, though both are questioned. There is another story that we need to touch on, and that is the Epic of Gilgamesh. I did a full video on that a while back, but we'll go over some of it again here. This may have happened around the same time as her descent into the underworld. The god king of Uruk was Gilgamesh, who had a loyal ally and rival in Enkidu. Gilgamesh was a bit of a womanizer and abused his demigod strength to sleep with the women of Uruk, and he was a tyrant, which is why Enkidu was created. They fought and humbled Gilgamesh. In time, they would become the best of friends. And eventually, Ishtar would become interested in Gilgamesh and attempts to seduce him, and he rejects her. If you hadn't guessed from the descent of Inanna, she kind of has a reputation. She takes men and ends up destroying them. She had taken several lovers, and all met a horrible end. So he rejects her, and she gets mad. She goes and talks to Anu, one of the other deities, listed as her father in some tales, and throws a hissy fit, threatening to destroy the gates of heaven and issue forth an age of chaos. In time, Anu relents, and Ishtar brings the bowl of heaven and lets it loose in Uruk. Gilgamesh defeats it at the loss of Enkidu. Yet, that doesn't talk about how she became infatuated with Gilgamesh to begin with, and that we find in Inanna and the Hulupu tree. When she was still young, and had not come into her full power yet. She found a tree growing near the Euphrates River and had it moved to her temple. She would tend to it, but soon would find three figures taking up residence: the Anzu bird, and Lilutu, and the snake who knows no charms. A young Gilgamesh would come and slay the serpent and scare away the other two. Take note that in this version of the story, Gilgamesh is said to be her brother. In time, the tree is turned into her throne. There are a few other stories of her, but very important. Now, when Ishtar was young and naive, she was ignorant of the carnal acts. She would ask her brother to guide her down to Kur, where she was to eat a certain fruit which granted her her full knowledge of sex. I'll let you read in between the lines here. How did she marry Dumuzid? Well, when Ishtar came of age, Utu spoke with her. Two suitors approached, a farmer and a shepherd. Ishtar preferred the farmer, but between suggestions from her brother and Dumuzid's appeals, she agreed to marry the shepherd Dumuzid. You see, whatever gift the farmer could offer, Dumuzid could offer a better one. Honestly, I think the farmer came out ahead here. Do you remember the royal raiments that Ishtar had? The ones she had to remove to enter Kur? Well, they're called the Mi, and each had a meaning. They represented core principles of human society: law, truth, victory, weaving and writing, counsel, kingship, and priestly work, and oddly enough, horizontal work. Now the Mi were in the hands of Enki, who lived in the city of Eridu. Ishtar sought to gain more power and visited Enki. Wine and food were brought out, and a drinking competition begins. Soon Enki is good and drunk, at which point Ishtar asks for the Mi, and her host gives them up without a fight, at least until he sobers up and finds Ishtar gone, and the Mi's too. Enki calls upon monsters which pursue Ishtar, but her attendant shielded her until the goddess reached Uruk. Enki was mad, but eventually made up with Ishtar. The story is meant to represent when the rulers of Sumeria moved from Eridu to Uruk as the capital. Ishtar is wrathful, and we see this in the tale of Shukalatuda, a failed gardener. No green thumb for him. Everything died, except for one tree. Ishtar saw this tree and decided to take a nap beneath it. Our gardener saw the woman and forced himself upon her, and escapes before she can smite him. He escapes as Ishtar goes crazy, turning the waters to blood and other plagues. Enki aids Ishtar in her hunt, and she brutally terminates her assailant. Now, there is another story I do want to touch on regarding Dumuzid. In this one, he was murdered by some bandits, or demons, and Ishtar is again furious. Sadly, much of the tablets that this is written on is destroyed, beyond even an attempt to read. In time, she finds out that the culprits are an old bandit woman named Belulu and her son, Gurgir. Ishtar turns the old woman into a water skin, which was used to pour the funeral rites for Dumuzid. Yeah, he ends up dead in this one as well. That is a fair bit of stories to begin with. Let's look at why some have multiple names. I touched on this earlier, that multiple gods were merged like Inanna and Ishtar, but there is more. First, these tales were written across thousands of years. Second, some name issues arise from translation issues. For Egyptian example, it needs to be walked through other languages like Greek and Latin before attempting English. This is even harder with older languages, especially with broken tablets, only giving half of the story. There is one more story I want to look at. Remember, that Ishtar is a war goddess. She plagued the world with disease and strife, constantly. Our greedy goddess sought to increase her influence, and even moved against Ea, the leader of the gods. In a divine council, he sought a solution, and that was creating a rival goddess called Sultan. She was sent to face Ishtar, hounding her by day and roaring throughout the night. Now, much of the text is destroyed here, but in time, Ishtar's heart is calmed, and Ea agrees to call Sultan off. Now, I did mention some similarities to the resurrection of Jesus and the celebration of Easter, didn't I? Did you notice any? Someone dies and is resurrected. You could also see removing the raiments as similar to the burial cloth left behind in the tomb, and both were hung up. We also see similarity to the story of Moses and the plagues which Egypt went through. That even included turning the rivers to blood. This shouldn't be too surprising. The Sumerians predated the rise of Christianity by several millennium. Bringing about the influences are very easy. Oh, and there is a forbidden fruit story too. There are a few other ties. Ishtar is often associated with the planet Venus. But isn't there another goddess tied to Venus? Oh yeah, Aphrodite, also called Venus. And what is she the goddess of? Yeah, there is a strong potential that they are tied together too. Though some claim that she is also tied to Athena. What do you think, adventurers? She is kind of a nutjob, wouldn't you agree? How many fights did she instigate in these stories? Too many. Do you see why I refer to this as a soap opera? She cheats on her husband, causes his death, not to mention that she starts wars, steals the me, and how many other crazy things. Funny thing is, with the rest of the myths from this age, they are just as crazy. Wait until you find out about Tiamat. No, not the five-headed dragon you see in Dungeons and Dragons. The real goddess is much more terrifying. Overall, Ishtar is a rather chaotic and dangerous individual, which is best to avoid. If she approaches you, expect trouble. If you reject her advances, she will act like a toddler and bring plagues and disease down on you. Not to mention, bully the other gods for monsters. She is well known for using people to her own ends. Be warned. Thank you for watching, adventurers. Please return next time for the Horned Serpent. Until then, I'll see you on the roads.